We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Antry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Happy New Year for this one, I guess is what we say, right? This is going to come out and then New Year's is going to happen on the weekend. That's the way the schedule goes.
Of winter here in Florida.
Oh, yes.
It got down to like 29 or something.
Ooh, below zero in Florida. How crazy town.
I don't know.
Think?
For sure it was down to 35, which was stupid cold.
Getting close. Here. Getting close.
So
Tom's shivering in his hoodie.
Very uncomfortable. I don't have the proper attire for this
That's true.
This sort of weather. This is not, I used to have this stuff. It'd be just like all normal people. Like when I lived in California,
right?
There were winters, and we had them, and they were cold. They weren't quite this cold. I mean, they got this cold, but then, I had like clothes that I put away during the summer and then took back out during the winter and put the summer clothes away.
Right.
I mean, there was a process. Here, we only have clothes.
That's right.
And most of them involve shorts.
Yep,
so
I would imagine.
I'm like trying to find jeans.
Well, Tom is suffering through very nearly hitting the freezing point of water, if
very close.
Might have crossed it. If you thought that I went through
close.
an adventure to be here last week, driving through the snowfall last Tuesday, and gosh, it seems like a lot longer than just a week ago that happened. I don't have anything to report on what I watched this past week, because I truly didn't watch anything. But I did have quite the adventure, making sure that all family members were able to be here for Christmas. So my sister and her boyfriend and their two kids, they went down to Las Vegas last Saturday. I mean, not... Yeah, how would that go? Not Christmas Eve, but the Saturday before that. That's what we're...
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So I don't know how the weeks work and the days work anymore, but that is the case. The Saturday before Christmas Eve. So they were supposed to fly back on the Wednesday after that, which if you've been following any of the news from anywhere in Canada, our airports were shut down. We had horrible winter storms going on, absolutely no way to land planes in our airports, and their flight was canceled. So of course this is, the Wednesday before the weekend of Christmas. Obviously many people are traveling around Christmas and all flights have been booked beforehand anyway. So WestJet, that they had booked their tickets through, basically just threw their hands up in the air and said, there's no chance that any of you are getting on a replacement flight anytime before December the 27th at the absolute earliest, and probably it'll be later than that. So that wonderful notice, was given to the passengers who had been stranded by the canceled flight at 1 a.m., which thankfully my sister's boyfriend was smart enough to keep his alerts audible so that it would wake them up when an email arrived. So at 1 a.m., she scrambled around and managed to book a flight on Delta, not back to Vancouver, but to Seattle, which was as close as they could get. And how they managed to get 4 plane tickets, on that day, this was like the Thursday, the next day, to Seattle, that was remarkable in and of itself. But they got in there on Thursday. Promptly Thursday afternoon, Seattle closed their airport. So they were in Seattle, hotels basically not available, no rental cars in sight, no train tickets available, no buses available. So on Friday, after work, I drove down to Seattle and picked them up. And thank goodness the weather conditions were not as bad as had predicted. It was predicted that from Thursday night to Friday morning, we were supposed to get about 20 centimeters of snow, just shy of a foot of snow. It wasn't. It was like an inch. So lucked out there. Then it was supposed to be frozen rain all day. They didn't even call it sleet. They're just like, it's going to be frozen rain all day long. I don't know how we got so lucky, but it got up to about -2, which was enough that the rain was not frozen, which meant that we didn't have just literal ice roads. If it had been ice roads and a foot of snow, I wouldn't have gone and got them. But because the weather cooperated with us, it's about a 3-hour drive down to Seattle. Normally, I went slower than that, so it took about 3.5 hours to go down and about 3.5 hours to come back. Got super lucky at the borders. There was a little intelligence behind it. We got 3 border crossings, one of which is always less busy than the others because it's a little farther away. But not usually this not busy. I guess people actually listened to the don't drive today warnings and didn't plan to go anywhere. So one car in front of me on the way down, one car in front of me on the way back. So all of that worked out better than we had feared, for sure. Everybody was here for Christmas. But yeah, it was a bit of an adventure. I was pretty tuckered out. So there we go. That was the driving last week compared to the week before.
See how this is an excuse to not watch a movie.
I know, right?
I got the new Batman movie for Christmas, but I haven't watched it yet.
As in the Batman. That's the one you got? Okay. Robert Pattinson.
The Robert Pattinson.
Okay.
Yes, that's right. Excited to watch it. Really, my expectations for anything DCEU, it's just so low that it really can't.
Is
not,
this part of DCEU? Oh, that's even less answerable these days with James Gunn now taking over the whole DC side of movie things.
The amount of Snyderverse people out there. I know there's like 7 really lonely people who just can't stop posting about it. But for the most part, the people who are mad that James Gunn is taking, I'm like, what could he possibly do that would be worse than that's already been done? They're like, let Zack Snyder finish his movies and then James Gunn. I'm like, all right, make more movies that don't make money. That makes financial sense.
Also, it's not like Zack Snyder had a true master plan with an end.
No,
the whole idea was to keep going and eventually hand it off to someone else. So yes.
No. All right, so we've been watching Wednesday, which I have universally liked every episode of until the most recent one.
Okay. That's still more than not, for sure, that you've enjoyed it.
So the most recent episode I watched was the one with Parents' Day at the school.
Okay.
So she's the if you haven't watched it, it's the Addams Family.
Yes.
Wednesday is a daughter. She's now in high school. She's going to this boarding high school for weird people like the Addams Family. And they're called others or outsiders, or I don't remember. They call them something. Anyways, so she's going there, and it's Parents' Day. And Catherine Zeta-Jones is playing Morticia, and whoever that guy is, whose name I cannot remember, the actor.
Louis Guzman?
Yes, is playing what's his name? Raul Julia's character. And
not that Raul Julia was the original either.
No, he wasn't. But anyways. So we watched the Addams Family, my son and I, my 13-year-old son, who's really liking Wednesday as well. So we watched the Addams Family just to sort of like, I'm like, this is more true to the original series.
So you watched the movie version of it.
The movie version of
gotcha.
it. Yes, with Angelica Houston and Raul Julia and Christina Ricci and whoever else was in that. And so the most recent episode of Wednesday that I watched is the Parents' Day where Catherine Zeta-Jones and everything shows up. And it's like not fair. It's not fair because the movies and the TV show before this, they were goofy and funny and, it was meant to be a comedy and silly. And Wednesday's not quite that. But the show is not quite a comedy. It's darker and more in line with her personality. Well, the parents are sort of oscillating between being goofy and overly affectionate, and then also being morose and embroiled in a controversy. And it completely didn't work for me. Like, completely didn't work for me. Like, I'm like, the only time I've ever said these words: get Catherine Zeta-Jones off the screen. Just get her off the screen. She's ruining this for me.
And we know that's not not because Catherine Zeta-Jones is just incapable of giving a good complex performance.
I just
or
don't
something.
think that the characters, like they couldn't do both. Like you can either be goofy and silly and over the top and that works, or you can be dour and brooding and mysterious, but you can't be both of those things like from one to the other. They were like, and I'm using this in the least clinical sense. They were like bipolar. They just kept swinging back and forth. I'm like, okay, you guys are giving me whiplash over here. So, least favorite episode I've seen up until this point.
Well, I mean, to be fair though, sometimes you write something, you try it, and the execution of it didn't quite come out the way you had seen it in your head. And I still give credit for trying something.
Right.
So.
I agree. And it was, I don't know. Anyways, I'm really liking the show. I can understand why people are kind of obsessed with Jenna, whatever her name is. Jenny Ortega. Because I'm obsessed with her. I mean, she's my wife's obsessed with her. We're all like watching to see if she blinks or not. Because that's like the thing. She doesn't really blink in the like every scene. You're like, is she going to blink this scene? Is she going to blink? And the dancing, the dancing scene.
I've heard of it. I haven't watched it yet. I'm not going to let myself get spoiled on it because I want to be surprised when I watch it.
Yeah, and you will be. Like, even if you watch all the people dancing on TikTok, it's not the same music and it's not the same dance. It like took pieces of it and stitched it together into what made sense for TikTok, but it doesn't really translate to, it's not like a one-for-one of what she was doing. So very much like that. I'm also continuing finally to watch Andor again. My son is out of school has ended. He's not backed up in homework, and we started watching that again last night. We watched like 2 episodes of it. So I think we're up to 6 or 6. I think we've just finished 6. What a great show. I mean, what a great show. It's the reason I think it's so great is because of the Peripheral. Okay, I know I'm going all over the place here, but the reason I think it's so great is because of the Peripheral. Because I finished the Peripheral over this.
I thought you were going to say Peripheral characters. No, you mean the show Peripheral.
The show, the Peripheral.
Even I was getting
Amazon
confused
Prime.
there. So let's
I
clarify
know. I'm
that.
telling you. You talk about whiplash. I'm sending you guys all over the place. So I've been watching the Peripheral like slowly, like as I can, in between people being in the room with me, because nobody's watching it but me.
Okay.
So I'm sort of like, when people are out of the room, I switch that on and I watch like anywhere from an entire episode to 5 minutes, anywhere in there. And I'm pretty good at following plots and, catching on pretty quickly to things that are going on. And this show is like, boy, if you didn't read the book, you're gonna, you better pay close attention, because they like, there's a couple times when they mentioned something, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I wasn't like hiccuping during that scene, because I would have missed that. And they never mentioned it again, but it is important for you to understand that of what they were speaking.
It's the opposite of something made by James Cameron.
Yes. Got to the end of that show, and I'm still a little confused at some of the stuff that was going on. They never explained it, or again, I like burped and missed something very important.
Gotcha.
So, well acted, well done. The special effects are good. Not nearly as actiony as I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a lot of fight scenes and action. It wasn't a lot of that, but the technology is in there. That's like, it's all very cool. Like it is.
This is near future
real.
Or far future, or
it is near future and far future.
Okay.
Gotcha. So there's a time travel element in there that's revealed very early, so I'm not spoiling anything.
Okay.
So it is. It's well acted. It's well done. It's just very hard to follow, if you're not paying too much attention. Whereas Andor, I'm like, it is a complex story. It's a or a little bit more complex, a lot of complex relationships and stuff like that. But it's so well done that like I haven't turned that on in like 2 months, and I turned it back on in the middle of the episode. I went, oh yeah, I remember this. And it was just like, boom, I was off to the races again with this show. So probably the best Star Wars thing I think that I have seen, in that includes The Mandalorian. Yeah, I think it's just so good. It's so well done, and it gives you, and again, this is what I really liked about the last show that they came out with that where with the Obi-Wan, where you saw sort of the machinations behind what was going on. Like, that to me is the most interesting part of Star Wars right now, is seeing how people within the Empire, what they have to do to live, to succeed. You know what I mean? It's like, and you can almost see it, and in this it's a little bit clearer. You can almost see how, from their perspective, it doesn't feel evil. You know what I mean? It just feels like you're in like a corporation, like a better off Ted sort of organization, where it's like, you're like, I'm just trying to do a good job.
Right.
And the fact that I'm oppressing other people to do it sort of doesn't really factor in, because they're the bad guys anyways, and I'm just being the good guy. And, you know, it's very, very well done. I haven't finished it yet, so I won't give my full. I will recommend the Peripheral. I think that it's good. I will say you should, you know, pay attention. And if you haven't read the books, then just be prepared that there's some stuff going on there. Like, I got to the end, and there's factions that they talk about, and they all have names. Still are really confused about that whole situation. Like, never quite got what was going on there. And they explained it at least twice, and I still never really got it.
So 3 overall recommended from Tom. That's pretty good. That gives you a selection if you haven't been watching those. And 3 different services going across there. So if you got Netflix, you can watch Wednesday. If you got Disney Plus, you can watch Andor. If you got Amazon Prime Video, you can watch The Peripheral. So there you go. Right. You'll find something somewhere. And I thought we were having ourselves a Christmas miracle, because Tom's camera was actually in focus there for most of the opening. You seem a little bit fuzzy back again. So it's got to be a bandwidth thing. It's got to be a Skype bandwidth thing on either your end or my end. I don't know, but the camera was capable of being in focus, but now it's back to being fuzzy. So, you know, all's well. All's well.
I think my well, I don't know. There's a lot of things that could be going on there. All right.
Do you have plugged into a tube-amp, Tom?
That answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your question answered, all you have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You go to our website, avrant.com, find our episodes, our show notes, and our Flickr album, so you can follow along with the pictures of which we are describing, hopefully so well that you don't need the Flickr album, but let's be honest.
Painting a picture with words.
That's what I'm
Or you can just see what we're talking about. Probably that much better. We know you're on the internet.
What the heck is Tom looking at? Because clearly he's not describing what I'm seeing. You can contact us. Well, you could follow us on Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant, where you can see our recording sessions and all my blurry glory. And Rob will also show the images up on the screen there. Contact us directly, rob@avrant.com. Are you still on the Hive tip? Are we still doing that?
I mean, I haven't honestly checked in on Hive all that much. I'm definitely still there, so that's where I'm hoping things, you know, maybe transition over to. But I don't know what's going on social media wise. But yeah, I'm First Reflect pretty much everywhere, so that still works for me. If you just want to try searching for that, whatever you're on, you might find me.
I'm not on anything.
Okay.
You can email me at tom@avrant.com.
That would be the way. Yeah.
We want to thank our listeners of the week. Become a listener of the week to support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, where you can leave us a PayPal donation. And this week we had 2 listeners do that.
Nice.
Aras and Eric. So thank you very much, Aras, and thank you very much, Eric.
Yeah, Aras and Eric, thank you both very much for the PayPal donations. We appreciate that financial support.
We also want to thank our 137 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service where you can sign up to be a monthly subscriber to our podcast. I think it's a minimum of $1 a month they will take from you and give most of it to us. So thank you to our 137 patrons, including Bertrand.
Yeah, we have no tiers or anything, no rewards. No. We set up as basic as it could possibly be.
Yes.
So whatever amount you want to give, we're perfectly happy with. But what are we on Patreon? They say $1 is the minimum, so that's where that rule came from. But we
didn't make that up.
No, it is patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. We're back up to 137. All the people whose credit cards dropped off, they got new credit card expiration dates and headed on over to Patreon and came back in. So 137 patrons over there, very much appreciated. And Bertrand, thank you for being one of them.
We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during the blizzard of 2023 in Florida, where
2023. Are you predicting the future?
Yeah, 2020. Well,
You're just getting used to saying it ahead of time.
can we just get over this year? 'Cause I don't know. At some point, like we're going to have a year and look back and go, well, at least it was better then. And we haven't gotten there yet.
You know, in a lot of ways, I'm looking at 2022, like obviously not a perfect year, but like progress was made on several things. So this is one of those years I'm not gonna completely say go on, get out of here. It's some things were all right this year. I mean, hey, some things were all right this year is better than we could have said about the 2 years prior to that. So
I did hit my cycling goal this year.
There you go.
My cycling goal was 100 miles a week on average for the year. And
that's right.
Even though I haven't cycled in the last week because of the blizzard that I am going through, the current cold snap, I'm still at over 5,500 miles for the year. So I'm already hit my goal. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah.
So we got some notes of gratitude from Dazz, who says he enjoyed every episode in 2022 and is looking forward to what we bring in 2023. Karl, who says, Tom, keep up the rants in 2023. It's hard for me not to. This is just the way I talk. Aras, Gurinder, who says, Tom walked to the theater to see Big Trouble in Little China, huh? Uphill both ways in the snow, no doubt. Well, that was California, and it snowed where I lived in the Central Valley. It snowed almost as often, or just a little bit more often than it snows here. So I've lived in Florida with snow once, and then there it snowed, I think, twice the 20-something years I lived there. So, yes. Infinite Gary, who says, despite the storms in Rob's era, he's sure he find a way to winterize. And there's a picture here, I guess we're showing of it.
Yes. One of Gary's favorite pictures of a CRT TV sitting out on the sidewalk in a big snow blizzard. Somebody put it out there. My TV's not a CRT anymore. I do have a lot of TVs sitting around in my apartment that I'm not using, that for whatever reason I have just never managed to get the motivation to sell or depart in some way, but not a CRT, Gary. Not quite going back that far for me. Okay. But yeah, that's a fun little toasty TV out there.
You got Jay, who says, Merry Christmas. Mark, Dan, Bertrand, and Greg. So I'll say all those names again real quick because there's got a little lost in there. So Dazz, Karl, Aras, Gurinder, Infinite Gary, Jay, Mark, Dan, Bertrand, and Greg. Thank you for thanking us.
Yes, indeed. I'll say names one more time so they came from my lips. Dazz, Karl, Aras, Gurinder, Infinite Gary, Jay, Mark, Dan, Bertrand, and Greg. Thank you all very much for sending in the notes of gratitude to us for keeping the podcast going. Those notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. That's how the podcast works.
Yes, I will say that I am going to probably have to excuse myself in a minute to go get some more coffee because
we're pretty used to that by now, I think.
Well, no, so I have excuse.
That should be a thing. It should be, we should have like a AVRant bingo or a prediction like, when will Tom's coffee break be?
Well, so I had to go in to give blood work for physical so that we could get some sort of discount or credit on our insurance.
Okay. You guys do it that way. That's not a bad idea. We should institute that. We need more blood donors here.
So, no, I wasn't donating blood.
Oh,
they were doing blood tests.
Oh,
so I had to fast last night, and I couldn't drink anything this morning. And as soon as I got back, I made myself a cup of coffee. But I am still under caffeinated.
Like, you're saying all that as though it's an unusual thing that you're drinking coffee and need to go get more during the podcast.
Usually it would be because I was cycling in the morning, and I am not cycling in 42-degree weather or whatever it was this morning. It was ludicrous. It's just too cold. We have some snowbirds here who are like, I'm still cycling tomorrow if anybody wants to go with me. I'm from Chicago. It's not even that cold. I'm like, go back. Take your warm clothes with you.
Yeah.
In the news, we got this from Nathan, who says, 3D is back, baby. I guess. Okay.
Yes.
All right. You and Nathan go have your little 3D party.
Well, to be fair, even Nathan was saying it sarcastically.
All right. Acer will be showing off their new SpatialLabs display at CES 2023. 2 external displays, View and View Pro, and a Helios 3, was that Helios? Yeah 300 Helios. Laptop display. All 3 are 15.6 inches in size. They bring a couple new twists to glasses-free 3D viewing. They are using eye tracking to supposedly help focus the stereoscopic 3D effect, and they are using new SpatialLabs Go You have to throw a Pokeball at it. AI-based technology to convert 2D images into 3D. They recommend a minimum of an Intel Core i7 processor with at least a GeForce RTX 2080 graphics card to handle the 3D power. So...
I did enjoy that they were talking about glasses-free 3D like it's a brand new idea.
No one's ever thought of it.
Ever tried before.
The first time.
Never had a Nintendo 3DS. That was never around. Honestly, the technology has not changed drastically. We're still using that kind of lenticular, type of technology to make this happen. But the new twist is the eye tracking. The eye tracking, which I guess they're going to adjust. I mean, all they can do is adjust which pixels are lighting up with what colors and how much. So I'm not totally sure how the eye tracking works on this. It's not foveated rendering. It's not, virtual reality or something. But anyway, they're talking about the eye tracking is going to make the glasses-free 3D experience that much better with a, 15.6-inch display. It's just all the immersion. Although, to be fair, that's bigger than a Nintendo 3DS screen, so I guess it's got that going for it. But we'll see if this just lights the world on fire.
Extremely exciting.
This was clearly what James Cameron had in mind for how he wants you to watch all the Avatar sequels, was on a 15-inch display. Yeah. 3D's back, baby. It's a light news week, Tom. It's a light news week.
CES is coming up. In fact, not only is it light news for us, but from AV Gadgets perspective, I was getting just floods of emails until last week. Yeah. And last week it just stopped. Like it's Christmas, we're out.
Right.
And they just shut it down. So I haven't gotten an email. Like my AV Gadgets account hasn't gotten an email. I think I got 3 emails yesterday total, and 2 of them were from Facebook to tell me that there were people who wanted to hear more from me, and I said, shut up. LG announced some new soundbar models ahead of CES 2023, where they'll be shown. The only kind of interesting one is the SC95, which comes with a bracket for attaching it to their most popular C-Series OLED TVs that will be perfectly aligned to keep its 3 upward-firing drivers in the optimal position. Optimal, they say. Yes, they're saying it's a 3.1.3 channel soundbar.
Got that center up firing that's so popular in Atmos.
Where do I find that one on my AV receiver? Right. Where do I find the setting for the up firing center?
And maybe they're just catching on to all the forum craze about Oro 3D, and they're like, hey man, we can do center height. Toss it in there. Exactly the way Oro wanted it, up firing, Someday somebody is going to break one of these things apart and find out that those up firing speakers are just passive radiators. That's all they are. It's just passive radiators. I cannot stress enough. I did write an article. In fact, I wrote another article about it recently, which I haven't published yet on AV Gadgets, about up firing speakers and how important it is that their placement be it's extremely important for their effectiveness. And when you get somebody who says it works great, and you get another person who says it doesn't work at all, it has very little to do with the speaker and everything to do with the positioning and the room and everything else that they're in. And it's such a crapshoot. And shoehorning them inside of a soundbar is the dumbest way to do it. Like, it cannot now they got a bracket to align it with your TV, though, Tom. Is going to make it all perfect.
Yeah, because no one's ever tilted the TV. No one's ever turned it to the side.
Viewed their TV from a little bit off angle or something. Yeah.
Right. Most of their higher-end 2022 soundbar models are sticking around, so no big changes. At least they support DTS signals, including DTS-X, not that you can get them from your LG TV. And they have an HDMI input with 4K 120 and VRR pass-through. So if you're sticking with all LG and you want to hear anything encoded DTS, adding an LG soundbar is your option, since their TVs don't support DTS at all anymore, which means you have to plug things into the soundbar and then send it back up to the TV.
Yep.
Which is how everybody wants to plug things in these days, right? No? They just no? Okay. This soundbar announcement has also confirmed that there will be a C3 OLED series next year, to no one's surprise. Mm-hmm. And since they always have to go tit for tat with Samsung, last year Samsung's added Q-Symphony to their soundbars and TVs, which is just a way of having the TV speakers play along with the soundbar instead of being silent. So for 2023, LG is adding...
I had to put this in here.
Wow Orchestra, which is the same thing. Wow. Wow.
They have a whole
Orchestra.
bunch of trademarked things in these LG soundbars called Wow something. That's their Q. Samsung uses Q for everything. LG already had Think. They already had THIQ. INQ, I guess. Yeah, THINQ. We always said thin Q, but it was, they had Think. They already had that, but I guess the Q was already too reminiscent, so all the trademarking for LG has transitioned over to Wow now. So Samsung's got Q-Symphony. Well, we're going to do you one better. We got Wow Orchestra.
Part come from, though? Where does that come from? Where?
I mean, it turns your 3.1.3 soundbar from just a dinky 3.1 to 0.3 into a Wow Orchestra because your crappy TV speakers are playing along with them now. It's going to make you say wow. It's going to turn everything. It's going to turn your one stand-up bass and your vocalist and your jazz thing. It's going to make that sound like an orchestra, Tom. I'm going to say wow. I love trademark names.
It's so dumb. It's so
it really
dumb.
is. That's one of the worst ones I've heard.
It's, here, and this is the time of year where Reddit is already a toxic place to begin with. It's not that friendly of a place to begin with.
Indeed.
And then you send a bunch of people who just got either money or gifts involving soundbars or home theater and send them into Reddit with how come it still sounds bad and there's just a list of people going because that's crap, it's garbage, just throw it away. It's gonna be a rough couple of weeks here. That happens.
No surprises. Happens
Comments
every time.
From listeners. Mark also had issues with the YouTube app on his Apple TV. He found that resetting all of his video settings back to default got things working. So not quite a full factory reset of the entire Apple TV, but more than just turning match dynamic range off. I vaguely remember talking about that
last
week,
there were issues last week. Somebody was having problems with the YouTube app specifically where, you just try to press the home button and switch to some other app, but it would say, do you really want to leave YouTube? And then you have to say yes. And it's like, well, now you're going to get a black screen for a while.
Right.
And we're just not going to let you go. There's no chance you want to watch something other than YouTube.
Never let you go.
That's right.
Whatever it is.
You're just stuck there. So anyway, Mark said, yep, he ran into that problem. So part of that, confirmation. Thank you. Others have faced the same issue. And he was like, didn't stop short of doing an entire factory reset of the whole Apple TV. Mark didn't actually mention having to uninstall and reinstall the YouTube app. So that was something I suggested because I don't think that's too difficult to try. But he's like, nope, the thing that got it working for him was there is in the video settings, just reset your video settings back to default. And that got it working for him. So give that a try. It's not erasing all of your logins, at least, to try that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lastly, we have Jay, who says, for any diehard 3D Blu-ray fans out there, both of you, whoever you are.
Acer's got glasses free 3D coming at you. But that's not what this is about.
Australian disc publisher Random Space Media has a selection of fairly recent 3D titles that you might not be able to find elsewhere. Most are region free, but a couple are region B.
Yeah.
So be aware.
Yes.
Sony's latest Spider-Verse movies are there. There's more than one Spider-Verse?
Well, I mean,
I guess it's the new Spider-Man. Is it the new Spider-Man?
You got the Tom Holland, you got Into the Spider-Verse, you got Venom. So it's all kind of part of the Sony.
I haven't seen the second Venom movie.
Right.
There is a second Venom movie, right?
There is. I don't think that one's actually listed. I think it's only Venom that I see here as part. There's only 11 of them. That's all they got listed on their website is 11 of them. 11 movies total.
Venom's another one of those movies where I've seen it at least twice, and I still can't tell you what happened in that movie. I just remember the beginning of it being okay, and then There's a big fight around a rocket for some reason. Okay, there's latest Spider-Verse movies are there, as well as Jurassic World series and Jumanji movies. Unfortunately, the 3D versions appear to only be 5.1 audio, but at least it's lossless, True HD, or DTS master audio, so it's not like total crap. But
yeah,
no Atmos or DTSX.
It's again one of those things where if you really want the best of everything, like when Gravity came out, and it's like you really do want to watch Gravity in both 3D and Atmos, because it was a good showcase for both of those things. But the disc versions of Gravity, it was like if you got the 3D, you don't have the Atmos, and if you have the 2D version with Atmos, you don't have the 3D. So yet again, here we are with 3D Blu-ray versions, including they have some like combo packs that are Ultra HD Blu-rays, but include a 3D Blu-ray in the pack. But you don't get it with the Atmos or the DTS-X audio. So I don't know why we have to choose between these things as fans if we want all of them, and have to resort to remuxing our own versions and watching them through Plex or something or other. But anyway, there's 11 movies over there in Australia that you could import if you wanted to, if you really want 3D versions, and you just can't get them in 3D in North America. Random Space Media, that's the name.
Questions, hopefully not about 3D. Raph says, after our discussion 2 weeks ago about Paradigm's Defiance X subwoofers and whether it would be worth using anthem room correction on each sub, individually he's decided to go with our suggestion and spend less on subwoofers that can play a bit lower instead. He has another question. He's a little worried that it might sound silly. It's all right. I sound silly all the dang time. You'd be surprised how often I sound silly.
I like this question. It's absolute. I love that somebody was willing to ask it. So thank you.
But when we talk about the -3 dB point, you see that -3 dB figure on a spec sheet. What does that actually mean? Is there any difference in the meaning of that spec for a speaker versus a subwoofer? I have written an article literally called on AV Gadgets, what is like the -3 dB point?
Okay.
So I'm going to look that up real
Tom
fast.
obviously didn't think this is a silly question that doesn't deserve an answer.
Well, the thing is like, we all throw that around.
We
like
sure do.
It's not, it like we all know what it means. Right. And then this happens a lot in many, many hobbies. And
for sure.
At some point, I'll give you a perfect example. So when you get compression shorts for the first time, right? I remember the first time I bought compression shorts. I went, okay, I got these compression shorts. Like, are these underwear or are they shorts? I'm like, because they're called shorts, but they're not called underwear. So I went and Googled, and it was like somebody asking on Reddit or something, do I wear underwear underneath my compression shorts?
All right.
And it was just people I wear underwear underneath my underwear. Just constant mocking all the way down. And I'm like, okay. It is a reasonable question to ask because I mean, it's not called the right thing, and no one's really explaining it, and somebody has to ask the question. So yes, I think this is a perfectly valid question to ask. So let me find my article.
Absolutely. Well, I guess I'll just start in then. So in the simplest terms, let's imagine that you have a nearly perfect speaker or subwoofer where whatever the signal says, the signal is coming in and it's saying play this frequency at this volume level. That's the set of instructions that we basically talked about last week of any audio signal. You can think of it as just a set of instructions, and it's saying play this frequency at this volume level for this duration. That's the way you can envision what that signal is essentially telling any speaker or subwoofer to do. So if you have a nearly perfect speaker where, if you measured it, it's a straight line, right? You send a sweep where it's all the frequencies, one after another, all at exactly the same volume level. And what comes out of the speaker, you measure that, and it looks like a straight flat line going across. But at some point on either end, on the high end of that speaker or on the low end of that speaker or subwoofer, it starts becoming incapable of just reproducing the exact same volume level from that signal that said play all these frequencies one after another at the exact same volume. It starts becoming incapable either because mechanically it just can't keep moving at that frequency that high or that low, or it's some electrical property where it just starts to not be able to play quite as loud as the signal asked it to. So at some point, there's going to start getting a little bit quieter than what the signal is requesting. And there's a little bit of a hill, a little bit of a slope that starts happening right at that moment. And eventually that slope comes down to where it is 3 decibels quieter than what the signal was asking it to play. And that is the minus 3 dB, dB standing for decibel. It's the minus 3 dB point at the high or at the low. So this question is doubly valid to ask because there's a lot of shorthand that gets used. With subwoofers, some places like SVS, they'll show you what is the minus 3 dB point of both the low and the high, right? They'll show you it's 17 hertz on the low end and 250 hertz on the high end, right? You could send it a signal asking it to play 350 hertz, but it'll be quieter at 350 hertz than what the signal asked it to do. And in fact, at 250 hertz, if that's what the frequency range is given, it'll be 3 decibels quieter than what the signal asked it to do. And probably at 225, it'll be a little bit quieter than what the signal, and at 200, it'll be right where the signal asked it to be. And that's that little slope going from, say, 200 hertz to 250, and at 250, it's 3 decibels quieter. So you get the minus 3 dB point of both the low end and the high end, if it's specified that way, if they give you that information. But a lot of times on subwoofers, they'll only give you the low end, because that tends to be what most consumers are caring about, right? They want to know how low can this subwoofer play, and as long as it can play up to 80 hertz, they don't really care if it gets quieter up at 200 or something. That's not information they really worry about. So you'll see, okay, the minus 3 dB point of this subwoofer is 25 hertz, and that lets you know, okay, if I'm trying to play 20 hertz at the full volume that the signal is requesting, well, it's not going to get there. It's already 3 decibels quieter at 25 hertz than what the signal was asking for, and we know it's only going to get quieter lower than that. So it's useful in that way. We can see about how low can this subwoofer go before it just can't give you what the signal was asking for. Tom?
Yeah, so I mean, the assumption that we're making here is that in between, above whatever they say the minus 3 dB point is, that it is relatively flat. It's staying within plus or minus 3, which is basically a 6 dB range.
And that's another part of it. I'll get into that a little bit too, yeah.
Yeah, so we're assuming that it's going to stay relatively flat all the way, from there up. And sometimes you'll see like the frequency response given, especially for a speaker, it'll say, let's say 80 hertz to 25 kilohertz plus or minus 3 dB, or maybe even plus or minus 6 dB, depending on which speaker you're looking at or which manufacturer you're looking at. And a lot of times that if you see that larger range, it's not because, at least in my experience, it's not because they're trying to extend the low end. It's because they couldn't give you a plus or minus 3 dB because someplace in the middle, it dips or peaks someplace, and they're like, oh, we can't say plus or minus
got
3
to 4
because...
or 5, something like that. Yep.
Yeah, right in some crossover region between one driver and another, it has some sort of weird peak or dip, and they have to like, okay, well, we got to give them a plus or minus number that includes the entire range. So there are some assumptions going on here, and it's just kind of shorthand to give you an idea of how, what the evenness of the speaker is, how low and high it can play for a speaker, or just like Rob said, for subwoofers, no one should really care how high it can play. We only really care that it can play up to 80 hertz, or maybe like 120 if you got like small speakers that are satellite speakers or something like that. But most subwoofers are not having an issue up that high,
unless you're getting one of those 50-inch diameter subwoofers, and then it can't even get to 80.
It can't. It goes from 1 to 25.
Yeah, exactly. So what Tom mentioned there about the plus or minus 3 dB, that's an important thing too. You'll also, Tom mentioned, sometimes because at 2 kilohertz, it's actually 4.5 decibels quieter than what the signal asked for, or something like that. So they'll give you maybe a little bit bigger range, a plus or minus 4, or plus or minus 6, something like that. But sometimes you'll also see, I think Paradigm does this with their flagship speakers, where they'll have a plus minus 1.5 dB range, and then a you'll notice that the numbers are larger when they give the plus minus 3. So they'll say, okay, from 500 hertz to 10,000 hertz, it's plus or minus 1.5 decibels.
Yeah.
So, again, you're sending that signal that said, play all these frequencies at exactly the same volume. The speaker didn't quite do that, but it kept everything in the range from 500 hertz to 10,000 hertz within plus or minus 1.5 decibels of exactly what the signal asked for. There's no greater difference in that range of frequencies from the quietest to the loudest, than a 3 decibel range. But then they'll also give you the plus or minus 3 dB range, and that'll be from 40 hertz to 30,000 hertz or something like that, saying that, okay, if we're willing to give that much latitude, that much tolerance, plus or minus 3 dB, well, that we fit within that when we measure it over an even larger range of frequencies. So it gives you information there. This is one of the reasons why you would say all of these speakers say that they can play from 60 hertz to 25 kilohertz.
Yeah.
Why do speakers sound any different from each other? And we've talked about there are other facets like dispersion and transient response and things like that, but just the raw frequency response, while they all look like relatively flat lines, we might be talking about, yes, all of them are within plus or minus 3 decibels of what the signal asked for, but that could be as much as a 6 decibel difference. And if that's taking place in the vocal region of that range of frequencies, two speakers that both fall within plus or minus 3 dB of the entire vocal range, they both fall within that spec. Nobody's lying, but they sound significantly different because one of those speakers is 3 decibels louder than the signal asked for at 2,500 hertz or something like that. And the other one is 3 decibels quieter than the signal asked for. That's a 6 decibel spread potentially, at that same frequency. And that would definitely be audible, if it's right in the vocal range or something like that. Yeah. So that's how you can have all these speakers that appear to have exceedingly similar specs and yet really do genuinely sound different. Not just I have to have a cited test to be able to tell them apart. No, there really are different sounding, and it's because you could have as much as that 6 decibel spread in a critical region or something like that. So great question. I love it. Yeah. Definitely not silly, and more to it than you might expect.
Yeah, and you can actually. There's a ways of fudging these numbers too, quite a bit.
Are there ever?
If you ever see somebody just say the minus 3 dB point is this, right?
Oh, we should talk about that, particularly with subwoofers, because how was it measured?
Yeah, they're not telling you a whole lot. Is it measured anechoically? Like I've seen, I've had speakers for testing. And this company doesn't exist anymore, so it's fine to talk about it. But I've had speakers in for testing, and I'm like, they claimed a minus 3D point at like 40 hertz or something. And I was like, you guys are full of crap. This thing like falls off at like 90. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, well, we tested it in a corner.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's why it says it only has a minus 3 dB point because... They can't give you a plus minus because they corner loaded it, which screwed up everything else. But if you took kind of the average of the low, it doesn't really start falling off until the very end. That's why you won't get the plus or minus. So you actually have to pay attention to how they are actually like rating it. If it just says minus 3 dB, that could indicate there's a lot of it's a lot of variation, but it doesn't dip any lower than 3 dB from the lowest point of everything else.
Yeah. And I mean, this is one of the things, like, the very legitimate criticisms over at Audio Science Review saying that we hate that if specs are given by a manufacturer somewhere that consumers can easily see them, they're often so incomplete in their parameters that they're still not really useful, right? Yeah. And then the flip side of that is, well, if you're a marketing person, are you actually going to list all the parameters you need to? Because people's eyes are going to glaze over and they're going to go, why are there so many words when I just want to know how low this speaker can play?
Yes.
And there's like this, whole huge footnote section to tell you, well, what were the parameters where we tested how low this speaker can play? But I mean, in the pro setting, in the Audio Science Review setting, we do want that because you don't have the full information without it. So when Tom and I are talking about minus 3 dB specs, that is, you got to take that with a fudging, because we don't necessarily know all the parameters.
Yeah.
We have a pretty good idea when it comes to, say, SVS, because they will talk very openly with you about how they measure their subwoofers. So when they list plus minus 3 dB, we kind of have a pretty good understanding about all the parameters behind that, about where they got just that figure. But that is not true for every company across the board, so there's a lot of fudging and guessing going on sometimes. So there's absolutely educated guessing going on, and worst of all is when you just see something that just says frequency response. It doesn't even say minus 3 dB. It just says frequency response and gives you a range. It's like, what the heck does that mean? There's truly no parameters.
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. All right, Jay. Since his 6-month theater renovation ended up taking almost 3 years, Jay now finds himself with a Marantz SR7010 receiver that might be a little behind the times, and he wonders if he should upgrade it. His projector is an Epson 5050 UB, and he does want to use his PS5 for gaming. So would he benefit from an AV receiver upgrade, or can his SR7010 actually handle everything he needs already? It's just about pass through here because Dolby Vision is not an issue.
Dolby Vision's not an issue. Yeah.
And I don't think 5050 can do VRR or any of that other stuff.
It cannot. It can do 4K
HDR,
60.
Right?
Yep, it's about 4K 60, no VRR, and HDR 10. And yes, your SR7010 can pass through that just fine. The one little caveat, and it's not end of the world at all, is that so he's at PS5. Shouldn't be a problem for any of that. If you had an Xbox Series X, or you get one in the near future, that does have the option of manually putting it into 12-bit output mode. And I will say I have an SR7010, a Marantz SR7010, and it does not seem to play well with 12-bit signals. But in your Xbox Series X, there is also the option to set it to 10-bit instead of 12-bit, and that is what you would want to do. On the PS5, it doesn't do 12-bit output anyway, so that isn't going to be an issue with that one. So, in terms of what do you need on your AV receiver to be able to pass through, because you have an Epson 5050 UB, you are already fine. If it were, one of the brand new JVCs that can do 4K 120, then we'd be into a different scenario. But in your instance, you're fine already. You don't have to upgrade.
So he has only ever used Odyssey when it comes to room correction. Since he's been looking at AV receivers recently, it has him wondering about the other room correction programs. Anthem's Arc seems particularly intriguing to him. But ease of use is important to him, so in terms of getting the best outcome, but with the easiest process, he'd really like to hear a comparison from us and our opinions on which room correction program we'd recommend most highly. So, Andrew over at AV Gadgets, who you heard on the Thanksgiving episode, he had a Marantz, or I think it was a Marantz, that died on him, and so he bought an Onkyo that had Dirac in it.
That's right.
And he was super excited about it, got Dirac, and he started describing to me the process, and I went, that sucks. That sounds awful. I don't want to do that.
Now, to be clear,
it's
all doable, but it's a little bit more manual effort, hands-on. Right. It doesn't walk you through it quite as easily. So
I had Andrew write an article. I said, listen, I don't care what your opinion is. You've got experience with Odyssey, and you have experience with Dirac.
Yeah.
Write an article that explains why you prefer one over the other, and I will publish it. And he wrote an article titled, I switched from Odyssey to Dirac, and I wish I hadn't. So that might clue you into how he feels about it, and we will link that article up for you as well. But neither of us have experience. I don't have experience with Anthem, so Rob will have
I've got a little experience with Anthem Arc.
Both of us, me and Andrew, not
I see. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I mean, the 1,000-foot view of this, more or less, all of these room correction programs in here, and we're not getting up to the Trinov level here. We're not getting up to the Steinway Lingdorf Room Perfect, right? Those are in a different price class. So for what Jay is asking, I don't think maybe he wanted us to compare those two, but I don't think that's the price class that we're getting into. And those ones have significant differences in some of their capabilities. The underlying what type of filter do any of these systems use is now essentially universal across the board, except for Onkyo's Accu EQ, which is still in there and is now basically, superseded by them including Dirac in there. Or in the case of Pioneer, they still have MCACC that you could use, but basically superseded by Dirac now. So across the board, even in the case of Trianov and Steinway-Lingdorf's Room Perfect, they are using FIR filters, finite impulse response filters. That is the type of filter, the technology underlying all of it that all of them are using across the board now. So It basically comes down to what are the calculations and algorithms that each of them are using, and how do they apply those FIR filters, and to some extent, how many FIR filters do they have? But it's really more about the programming. How do we end up programming all of these FIR filters? Because again, another 1,000-foot view thing to keep in mind of all of this is no matter how many algorithms the measurements are run through, no matter how many calculations are done, at the very end of the process, there is a single series of filters applied to the signal, and there is a single output coming out of each channel of whatever it is you're doing. It's not as though you can magically apply more filters. You can have more filters that all cascade with each other and result in a different ultimate outcome. But all of that is done behind. At the end of all of these, you end up with one series of filters applied to that signal and some kind of shape other than, signal came in, a bunch of stuff was done to that, and something came out. And there is one waveform that came out of that thing at the end of all of these. So when we're talking about the ones that are more contemporary in terms of price point, Odyssey, Dirac, Anthem, YPow, right? All of these programs now is just a matter of what are they doing behind the scenes? And like Jay is asking, how easy is it to apply all of that? Our overlying statement, and this gets debated all the time, but our overlying statement is if you are willing to put the time in to any of these systems, you can achieve exceedingly similar results. If you're willing to put the time in. And where I think most of the people online claiming there are these massive differences where one of them is so much better than the other, they're relying on the defaults. And I don't blame anybody for doing that. That's what they want you to do. They designed their default targets to be what they think is right and most pleasing. And in the case of both Dirac and Anthem, they target a rise in the bass. Their default target curve is not a flat line. It is not outputting, the signal said play all of these sounds at the same volume. That's not what they do. By default, they target a rise in the bass. And I think a lot of people really like that and enjoy it, and then come back and say, Dirac sounded so much better than Odyssey, because Odyssey targets a flat line in terms of what actually reached the microphone. But you can manually put a bass boost into Odyssey through the Odyssey Editor app or through the Multi-Q X software that you can load onto your Windows PC now. You could do that manually. Conversely, you could go into Dirac or Anthem's computer program and take away that bass boost that's there by default. You could manually target a flat line in the bass, and then they end up sounding pretty darn similar to the default target that Odyssey already has. And in YPow, you can do things through their app now, too. It's not quite as fine-grained control, but you can manually adjust the target curve in at least the high-end versions of YPow, not their entry-level receivers, but their flagship receivers. You can do that through the YPow app now. So our general thing is, yes, if you're willing to put the manual time in, you can make any of these programs sound very, very similar to each other at the very end of it. That means Jay is asking, honestly, the most important question: which one of these is the easiest to use? Because if you don't want to mess around with anything, then you basically just need to look at the default target curves and go, well, which one of these default target curves is most similar to what I want to target? Because if I don't want to mess around with any manual adjustments, and I know I want a rise in my bass, I should probably go with Dirac or Anthem, because they already give that to me without me having to do anything to the target curve. I get that. But in terms of just running the program, Tom and I are still going to tell you that Odyssey is the easiest. They basically...
I have other reasons for thinking that Odyssey is the one I would choose as well.
There are some others. I'll let Tom get to those. But in terms of just running the program, Odyssey is not even just Odyssey in the case of Denon and Marantz, they give you an entire setup wizard for the whole AV receiver that includes Odyssey setup as a part of it. And the process there of plugging the microphone directly into the AV receiver, it automatically beginning that process for you as soon as you do that, having the on-screen instructions, walking you through it step by step, you not needing any other devices. You don't have to have anything else in the room besides the AV receiver and the microphone that they included. And the way that they just walk you through it step by step on screen, I think that remains the most user-friendly, easy process to get to the end of it. In the case of Dirac or Anthem, you've got to have a separate device. You either have to have a smartphone app that goes along with it or a laptop computer that goes along with it, and you end up having to make manual adjustments and follow a little bit of, clicking next on the screen and all that, which isn't by any means end of the world, but there's opportunity in there for a step to get missed, a microphone not to get moved when it was supposed to get moved. Like there's little things in there where you do need to be paying attention. And sometimes people like that granularity and like being able to make those changes manually throughout the process. But if that's not what you want to do, if you want ease of use, we're still going to say that Odyssey is the easiest one to use. And then if you do want to make some manual changes to the target curve, you can do that for not a whole lot of extra money with the Odyssey editor app. But yeah, there are other parts of Odyssey that Tom's going to talk about that we also like.
So I did write an article, I think it was me, I don't remember, which room correction program is the best, Odyssey, Wipeout, Dirac. I didn't address ARC specifically, or Anthem specifically, because it's just not as widespread as the other three.
Sure.
And it basically said the same thing that Rob's saying here, which is they all use the same stuff. You can make them all sound the same. It's really not that hard. But the real selling point for me is dynamic EQ on Odyssey. I mean, I don't know about Anthem all that much, but when we compare Dirac to Odyssey, which those are the two that everybody's talking about these days, and those are the two that most people are like deciding between. You cannot. There is no dynamic EQ equivalent in Dirac. Yeah. There is no curves of equal loudness setting in Dirac. You can set a curve of equal loudness. You can make a curve for that based on a volume level, but then you have to watch everything at that volume level, which defeats the purpose.
So you can store like 4 different target curves that you created.
Yes. You're like, I like to watch movies at -5. I like to watch YouTube at -35, and I like to watch, Hulu at this volume, or Disney and Hulu at, -12.5, which is pretty close to what I watch things at. And therefore, I'll set these 3 curves, and I have to change it manually every time I don't want to do that. I don't have to do that. And there is something to be said for being, the most seasoned of these solutions, and that they just had the most time to fine tune it. Do I think Dirac will get there and do everything that Odyssey? Probably they can. They certainly can. They just haven't had the time or the number of hours of improving it that Odyssey has had.
Well, for them, the trick is not having the microphone plugged directly into the AV receiver.
Yes.
Now they can't do some of that volume auto detection because they don't know if maybe when you plug the microphone into your computer, that you change the gain on the microphone. Yes. So that's where a lot of that comes from. That's a problem that I'm not sure how they're going to ever work around. Right. I mean, Wipeout does have a version of curves of equal loudness. They call theirs Wipeout volume. So they do have that. But Anthem's Anthem room correction ARC does not. They're similar to Dirac, where the microphone gets plugged into your computer, not directly into the AV receiver. So they have a similar thing where they don't have a curves of equal loudness equivalent to Odyssey's dynamic EQ or Wipeout volumes. So, I would put Anthem's ARC and Dirac as very contemporary to one another. They are a little bit more hands-on. Some people really love that. Everything's done on your computer. It's not done on the AV receiver directly itself. Both of them by default target curve that includes a rise in the bass. So I would put those two as very much contemporaries to one another. So, I have no beef with that. There are people who love that process and don't find it challenging or difficult or anything like that. And that's great. I don't have a problem with any of these.
Well,
but I'm just going to say, if you want the easiest, I still think it's Odyssey.
Yeah, that's, I think, what it comes down to is nobody has really done anything different yet. It's all sort of the same stuff.
Can you do? Well, I mean, Dirac is aiming for this whole active room correction thing, which isn't here yet, but that would be different.
Before Odyssey, the active room correction, before Odyssey introduced fur filters, we thought parametric EQ was pretty much all that could be done. And then all of a sudden, Odyssey came out with fur filters. We're like, oh my God, this is great.
And I mean, it's funny that the P in YPOW was parametric, and now it doesn't really, now they're on to fur filters, so it doesn't really count. And Anthem as well. Anthem used to all be parametric filters. Now Anthem Arc Genesis, we haven't mentioned that it's actually Anthem Arc Genesis now. And Genesis is where they transitioned over to fur filters. So they've all done
until we see an implementation of something substantively different than what we currently have with Odyssey. To me, if you're looking for like ease of use and ease of access and ease of modification, yes, you lose some control and you lose maybe some power to a certain extent because you're not using you're using the processor in the receiver and not your laptop. Well, fine.
But now they have multi-Q X, so it's $200 extra. That's where they're getting you. But now Odyssey can give you that very granular manual control if you really, really want it. So they're all really. They're all kind of merging, right? That's what's happening. They're all kind of reaching the same endpoint. That's what's ultimately going on here.
They just all need to change their name from room correction to something else.
Right.
Because I constantly see people say, why do I need to buy acoustic panels? I've got room correction.
Indeed.
Yeah. I mean, you can call it that, but it's not. It's not. Keshaun wrote us a couple of weeks ago after having installed the larger Chief CMA 348 projector vibration isolator on his Sony projector, but finding that his image still shook when his six subwoofers blasted out deep bass notes. We wondered if maybe it was actually his screen that was shaking for him, because we thought he had a drop-down screen. But it turns out he actually has a fixed frame screen. We mistook the photo for showing a pull-down, so that's our bad there.
It was my bad in particular.
And he put his hand against it while the image shook from some deep bass, and he didn't feel any movement at all from the screen itself. Did you touch the frame or the screen?
I don't know.
Material. You know what I mean? That screen material could still be shaken. But anyway. So he did try weighting the vibration isolator down with some additional ankle weights, because one of my thoughts, and I think Rob's thoughts as well, was that maybe this thing is just a little bit too light for this heavier one.
Yeah.
But he says he couldn't really tell a difference. Then he finally switched up the source material and found that the isolator is helping for quite a lot of the deep bass, but certain frequencies just overcome it. So at this point, he figures he's fairly happy and he'll just leave it for now, unless we have any other simple ideas that we think might improve things further. No, I do not. I mean, it's still, for me, like impossible to know whether or not the screen is actually shaking from just the amount of air that's moving in your room, which I think is still possible, which there is nothing to do other than make it tighter. But even then, I don't think that necessarily would get rid of it 100%. And the structure of the room shaking, and that's what's shaking the mount. I mean, it could be either of those things, it could be both of those things, it could be neither of those things, and it's something else. I don't know what it could be, but it could be something else.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you start saying this is happening much more at certain frequencies and not shaking at others, that starts making me think there's some resonances in this room. There's some particular frequencies that are, we would expect this, like physically, structurally vibrating the room more than other frequencies, and that should happen.
But
is
every that shaking the projector, or is it shaking the screen, or is it shaking a little bit of both of them?
Yeah, that's right. So that is a challenge. It does make me wonder, like, at no point, I carefully read his emails, at no point did he mention playing a sweep. And you would think a man with 6 subwoofers would be all over playing bass sweeps, but maybe not. Some people just don't like the idea, or they feel unsure of how they should actually do it. And that's where I'll mention, I wouldn't always go to YouTube for bass sweeps because I don't know what their compression is actually doing to the signal. If it really is saying to play all those sounds at exactly the same volume, I'm not 100% confident in that. But I would go to audiocheck.net where you can generate any sweep that you want for yourself. You can play that back directly off of your phone, or load it up onto anything that can play an audio file and just play it that way. So that's where I would go, audiocheck.net, to make a bass sweep. And I don't think it's gonna solve your issue in any way, but it might at least enlighten a little bit of, it really is just like these 3 frequencies where this happens. At which point I like, with the vibration isolator already there, I'm not sure what we do. You could apply EQ to your system to cut down those particular frequencies, but if everything is already measuring as a nice flat line. But the other thing that the bass sweep might reveal to you is, you got 6 subwoofers, you got 4 smaller ones at the front of your room and 2 gigantic ones at the back of your room. That doesn't automatically mean you have linear bass. You could still have humps and dips in your bass. You should have much more uniform bass, but it doesn't mean it comes out as a flat line. It means that you should have uniformity with the seats that you care about, but now maybe he hasn't applied a bunch of EQ. Maybe he still has some like really big humps at 2 or 3 frequencies, and those are the ones that are shaking his projector. So playing that bass sweep is still going to be revealing, and maybe there's more EQ that needs to be applied.
And if you can find a specific frequency or the range, you could go to like audio. Was it audiocheck.net? And
audiocheck.net, yeah.
Just find it, just create a note.
Right?
A very small sweep in that one little area, and just have it keep going until you absolutely, like, you should be able to physically grab the projector and see if that changes it.
Right.
If you grab the projector and it's still shaking just as much, it's not the projector.
Right.
If you touch the screen and it changes it, well, then it's the screen. And if it's your eyes, which might be the case, could be that the entire room gets blurry after a while. Then you're like, hey, it was my eyeballs the entire time.
There you go.
So maybe that will help inform you. Dazz. So a warning popped up on Dazz's Epson 5040 UB projector. It says, error in the Epson Cinema filter. Contact your nearest Epson service center. So he did. It seems this is a fairly common problem where the physical color filter that allows the 5040 UB to show full DCI P3 color gets stuck and either stays in place when it should be out of the way for SDR content or fails to move into place when it should for HDR content. His closest certified Epson repair center said it's a $400 fix. He isn't sure he wants to spend that money right this second, and it's not as though he can't keep watching his 5040 UB the way it is. He just have to live with the color gamut remaining the same for both SDR and HDR. So first up, is there an easy way to tell whether his unit has the color filter stuck in the light path or out of the light path? I don't know. It's not quite as easy. If you don't have any way to measure. Yeah, if you had a way to measure the colors, that would be the way to tell for certain, because that would be sending a test color, measuring it with a colorimeter, and being like, yeah, that's either pretty close, or nope, that is clearly much more saturated than it ought to be. The much more saturated would mean that the color filter is in place. The being about right would mean the color filter is not in the light path. But if you're just going to try to do it with your eyes, about the best I could think of, if you could get a hold of any of the sort of SDR test patterns, this could be as simple as the freely available AVS test pattern disc that has been around for ages and ages. That's going all the way back to DVD, but that's fine for this purpose. Or like the old Digital Video Essentials. What you'd be looking for is one of the skin tone tests, where they just have a bunch of different people with different skin tones up on the screen. And if that color filter is in the light path when you're showing what should be like DVD color, everybody's skin is going to look too reddish. That's what's going to end up happening. It's going to look like everybody is getting close to having a sunburn if that color filter's in place when it shouldn't be. So I think that's probably the easiest way that you could tell without measuring to know for sure. Okay.
Yeah.
100 years I wouldn't have come up with that.
Ah.
So he looked up picture settings and found that the ones posted at Projector Review seem to be the most comprehensive. They have 3 different sets for 3 different viewing scenarios, and they're all highly customized. And then some other websites, such as Audioholics, have different picture setting recommendations altogether. Is there a single picture mode and settings that he could use that would be set it and forget it? He wants the best color for 4K with HDR, and he wants the most colors. He wants the least black crush, but the best the 5040 can do with spectacular highlights. Okay, so he wants it to be dark and bright at the same time.
Well, that's HDR.
He's willing to run the lamp in high mode. He isn't bothered by the fan noise. And he's willing to sacrifice SDR accuracy in order to get the most out of HDR. When he watched Ultra HD Blu-rays, he's using a Panasonic UB420 player, so he has their HDR optimizer available. He also has a PS5, so it'd be great if it's good for gaming too. So is there one picture mode and saying that can give him all of the things?
So short answer, no. You can't get all the things from one single picture mode, which is precisely why they give you a whole bunch to choose from. If your room is always dark, you can definitely have a scenario when your color filter is back to functioning after that $400 fix, where you could go to between just 2 picture modes, one for SDR content, one for HDR content. The third one that Projector Reviews talks about is a brightest setting, right? I've got a little bit of ambient light. I just want to make this projector as bright as I can, and that's their third set of settings that they give you. But if your room is always kept pitch black, you only need the 2, one for SDR, one for HDR. But if you don't even want to do that, if you just want one that you could use for both scenarios, you can't have all the things. When that color filter, that digital cinema filter, goes in the light path, it cuts the light output by about half. That's like 40%. That's just what it does. So if you want the blackest blacks, you'll get them with the color filter in place because it's cutting light output overall as soon as it goes in there, but you can't also have the brightest highlights at the same time. Just isn't going to happen. The flip side of, not the flip side, the other side of that as well is that would be the digital cinema picture mode. All right, digital cinema picture mode is what you would use for the widest color because it's got the filter in there, the deepest black levels, but chopping down what the highlights could be because you've reduced the light output. But what also happens is when you're putting in 4K HDR signals to your 5040 UB, you cannot do so at 60 frames per second. The 5040 UB just doesn't have the bandwidth to accept 4K HDR resolution at 60 frames per second. It tops out at 30. So if you also want to be playing your PS5, and you've set your PS5 to output 4K HDR, it means you're limited to 30 frames per second gaming, which I'm not even sure the PS5 would let you do. I don't think there's a way that you can limit its frames per second output. So all of this leads me to say, I think if I'm going to give you the answer that I would apply for myself, and this is what I wanted to do, you're going to need to change your mindset. You're going to need to change your mindset to, can I take all of my 4K HDR sources and have them output an SDR signal that still looks really great, and actually set my Epson 5040 UB in a picture mode that does the very best with SDR content that it can do. And that would be the natural picture mode, which Projector Reviews did a great job in a not great format. They actually just put it on a slideshow, so it's almost tough to tell where the start and the end of the slideshow is, but I'm showing them on YouTube here, and you can follow along in the Flickr album in order of their settings for the natural picture mode, which are good settings. What these do is maximize the performance of the 5040 UB for accurate color and maximum contrast for standard dynamic range. And like I said, I'm going to have to get you to change your mindset on this because you have that Panasonic UB420 Ultra HD Blu-ray player. It does an excellent job of converting HDR to SDR. And that's actually what you would want to get it to do in this case. Will you have the very widest color? No. but it does a good job of translating HDR's wider color gamut to SDR's slightly smaller color gamut. Will you have the widest contrast? Actually, yes, because in this case, you aren't cutting down the light output capability by having that digital cinema color filter in there. You're allowing the lamp light to go through without that filter cutting 40% of it out there, and you actually get a wider contrast range because of that. So all things put together, when it comes to gaming, I definitely want to use this mode in this case, because now I can get 60 frames per second, and to me that's a bigger deal while I'm gaming than having some colors that are slightly more saturated. I'm not super duper worried about that when I'm gaming. I'd much rather have the 60 frames per second. So that's my answer to you. I don't know if I can convince you to change your mindset a bit, but if I were going to pick one picture mode to set and forget, it would be the natural picture mode. One little setting that I did want to highlight, there is an image processing setting in the 5040UB. They give you two options, fine or fast, and you might be thinking that, like they say it in their own manual, the fast is for when you want the least input signal lag, specifically for gaming. It doesn't do anything. You want to keep it on fine all the time. Projector Reviews highlights that, but it's worth mentioning yet again from my lips.
Okay.
Yeah.
On to a different topic. He saw a post from a user in the SVS enthusiast group on Facebook. This user was asking why people felt it was okay to drive SVS Ultra Towers with Emotiva amps when Emotiva only provides specification sound to 4 ohms, but the Ultra Towers dip down to about 3 ohms in places. Mm-hmm. He said that plenty of people say it's fine and no problem, but they don't provide any measurements or quantitative support. That explains why and how. And then Emotiva themselves say they do not recommend using their amps outside of their specified ratings. So as far as he's concerned, that answers that. And Emotiva amps can't properly drive SVS Ultra Towers. The original poster seems to have closed off further replies, so it's all a bit moot as far as getting back to that person, but it just sparked some curiosity in Dazz's mind that he'd like to understand. If a speaker is rated with a nominal 4 ohm impedance, but it dips down lower than that certain frequency, how does an amplifier with specs given for 8 ohms and 4 ohms only handle that? Does it fail to deliver the requested number of watts? Is there any danger or problem in such a scenario? So nominal means it's kind of like when we were talking about the plus or minus 3 dB point, before. There is the 4 ohm or 8 ohm nominal means that, it's not dipping significantly below that mark, right? It's going to stay around there. So 8 ohms, it's going to be usually above for the most part. The impedance, we've talked about a lot on this podcast, and I've got an article on impedance too where it talks about this. When it dips down below, it's not like your amp just shuts off and says, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Absolutely not.
I'm done.
We know this because we've all played speakers and had some sound come out at the frequencies where the impedance has dropped below 8 ohms or below 4 ohms.
So there's two things that you have to understand going on here. First of all, most people buy amps and absolutely do not need them. Okay, it doesn't really matter that the amps aren't compatible with their speakers because they didn't really need the amps to begin with because they don't listen at volumes that are loud enough at distances that are far enough. So therefore, the amps are always playing nice. And we have said, I don't know how many thousands of times on this podcast, you can drive any speaker with any amp as long as you don't turn it up too loud.
Sure.
It will work. It will make sound. It will not distort. It will not clip. It will be fine, but you just can't play it too loud because if you do, the amp will reach its limits of the power it can provide. Remember, the speaker requests or pulls the power. The amp does not push the power. So when the speaker requests a certain amount of power because of how low its impedance is and how loud you're asking it to play, it really depends on how much power it's asking for. A small amp that isn't rated into 3 ohms, as we're talking about here, does not mean it can't give a certain amount of power. It just means that at 3 ohms, that speaker is going to be requesting significantly more power to get to the same volume than it would be at an 8 ohm, if it was 8 ohm impedance at that point. So if the amp has the power, no harm, no foul. But if you're trying to drive a hard-to-drive speaker at very loud volumes, your amp has to have the power reserves and the ability to provide that power, or it will clip and have all kinds of issues.
In some form, it'll clip.
So it doesn't really... So the answer to the question is, Emotiva is always going to say, for their own protection, you should not pair our amps with something that is rated lower than what our amps are rated at.
If it has a nominal 2 ohm impedance, we're not going to recommend connecting it to this amplifier.
But, it's a nominal 4 ohm. The amp is rated in the 4 ohm. Everybody knows that it's going to dip below 4 ohms, here and there throughout the frequency range because of how speakers and drivers and everything else works. Everybody knows that it's going to be fine. That, it would have, even Emotiva should say, if you had called them, say, can I pair this speaker up with your amp? They would say yes.
They absolutely would. And I mean, ultimately, I saw the post, Dazz forwarded it, and the way this person was speaking, I don't know if there was going to be any convincing them. The real answer to give to that person would have been, call Emotiva. They will talk you through this. Or alternately, pay $300 and whatever dollars it is and talk to Gene over at Audiolics, because he will talk your ear off about how amplifiers work. But this is actually a fairly similar case to when we were talking about that minus 3 dB specification.
Yeah.
This is a specification that comes along with a whole bunch of other parameters besides just ohms and watts.
Yeah.
There are all of the distortion and noise specifications that are going on in here as well. What's really interesting, like this person pointed out the whole thing of, if I have an 8 ohm speaker connected to a given amp, and then I connect a 4 ohm speaker to that same amp, that amp should be supplying twice the number of watts, right? Mathematically, if you just exactly have the impedance of the load, you should be getting twice the number of watts out of the amplifier. And if you look at their specs, what they spec coming out at 4 ohms isn't exactly double what's coming out at 8 ohms. And that means this is an underpowered amplifier, and who knows what it would do at 3 ohms? It's just going to explode. No. The Emotiva amplifier, let's say you had exactly an 8 ohm load, and then you swapped it out for exactly a 4 ohm load. It will deliver exactly twice as many watts into that 4 ohm load. That is what will happen. It will just do so with slightly higher distortion than it did at 8 ohms. That's what the spec doesn't necessarily lay bare and clear, because Emotiva actually does a pretty good job of showing the parameters of their spec, right? They'll say, over this given frequency range, usually 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, at this total harmonic distortion percentage, with this amount of noise into this impedance rating, this is how many watts get delivered. And then we have that impedance, and this is how many watts get delivered. But that isn't telling you what actually happens when you're driving the speaker. When the impedance gets lower like that, it does deliver the mathematical number of watts that happen when the only parameter you change is the impedance. It's just those other parts of the spec, the distortion, the noise, or whatever, they'll go up. So we can continue that line, and actually, it does graph on a curve, just like you would expect it to. It's not like you get these weird, huge spikes or stair steps in the graph. You can extrapolate. All right, if this is what is happening to the wattage output or the distortion curve as impedance goes down, you can extrapolate what it would do at 3 ohms. This is how many watts would come out of the amplifier if we kept all the distortion and noise parameters exactly the same over the same given frequency range. Less than a whatever, it should have been double that number of watts at 6 ohms. It wouldn't be. It'd be a little bit lower than that, because this isn't a literally perfect amplifier. Or if the number of watts, and this is what would actually happen, the number of watts coming out at 3 ohms would be whatever that voltage signal says, the difference in potential across the two ends of this circuit. This is how many amps need to go across that circuit in response to this many volts going through this many ohms. It's just going to abide by Ohm's law. that number of watts will go out of that emotiva amplifier, but at a higher distortion level than it does at 4 ohms, at a higher distortion level than it does at 5, 6, 7, 8 ohms. That's what's going to happen in this circuit. So it's not as though these specifications are brick walls. That's not what's going on here. It's not that you have a 4 ohm load and this is exactly how many watts are coming out of that amplifier no matter what. No. It's all the other parameters that are part of that specification. They're just telling you, okay, we keep all the parameters static. Now the variable are ohms and watts. But that isn't what really happens. The watts come out as according to Ohm's law, and it's going to be the distortion and the noise that ends up changing. So right. I don't know if that's going to help. I hope that helps Dazz understand it better. Yeah. But I would tell this original poster, if you ever do get back to him, just talk to Emotiva or talk to Gene at Audioholics, because we're not going to be able to convince him.
Some people post online just because they want to say something that they believe, and no amount of...
He was angry and he wanted to be angry and everybody else is wrong, and that seems pretty evident.
There, years and years and years ago on a forum I was a member of, a guy posted asking if he could use multiple speakers stacked on top of each other so that he can get more volume at the front of his room for his front left and right speakers and the center speaker. And everybody said, no, there's comb filtering, there's other issues that you're going to run into, you know, blah, blah. And then it was just post after post of this guy responding saying, yeah, but they do it at movie theaters, but they do it here. But if you go to the concert venues, you'll see these stacks of speakers on top of each other and stuff like that. Well, it doesn't matter because all he sees, this person who literally knows nothing about speakers in home theater, is just sees a bunch of drivers on top of each other and says, "Oh, those are that. It's the same as what I can do at home." Mm-hmm. Well, and there was no convincing him. He just wanted.
There's no convincing.
He just wanted to. He just wanted to say that, and he was going to do it anyway. So the answer, and I've said this multiple times on AV Gadgets as well. There's some people. The answer is you're going to do it anyway, so just do it, and if you like it, then it's fine. You know, I don't have to come to your house and listen to your crap.
This original poster wants one of those amps that has a 2 ohm rating. And just says that it's exactly doubling as the thing goes down. And he's willing to accept that they're not going to put the other parameters in there so that they're able to fudge the numbers so that it looks like that on the spec sheet. That's fine.
Right. Just go buy a Crown amp, you know, because there's going to be a Crown one out there that's going to be, you know, they're going to rate down to 1 or something stupid like that. So there you go. Aras took advice, and instead of trying to get his KEF in-ceiling speaker that he built into a DIY on ceiling cabinets diagnosed and repaired after it fell from his ceiling, he went ahead and bought a replacement instead. He actually bought a pair because 2 speakers fell, not just 1. My dude, you could build a cabinet, but you can't secure it to the ceiling, I guess.
Well,
I don't know what's going on there. Maybe a high gravity day. One of them fell straight down hard, and it was exactly as we had suspected. He uses 2 pair of Z-clips to affix his DIY cabinet to the ceiling, but they're quite thin from side to side, and blasting some deep bass was enough to shake them free. So, what's a Z-clip? Is that like a French cleat? Is that what...
Pretty close. I mean, it's literally just, you know, you got one end and one end, and they just go like that on each other.
You just bounced it out, huh?
Yep. Because they're thin side to side, so it was enough to shake it to one of the sides, and then down it came.
That sucks. This speaker fell when he was trying to adjust it. He sort of half caught it on the way down, but it got damaged. So rest assured, everything is super secure now, and he always has a second set of hands to help him from now on. Lesson learned. Expensive lesson, but it's a lesson.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Now on to a question or two. When he put his KEF in-ceiling speakers into his DIY cabinets, he added thin rubber gaskets to nicely seal the edges of the speaker, or the driver in this case, to the cabinet frame. And that seemed to work perfectly. But now he's turning his attention to his surround speakers. They are KEF in walls, but similarly, he made DIY cabinets to turn them into on walls. He initially thought he'd like to put a gasket on those as well, but with the position of the dog leg clips that hold the in-wall speaker in place, there's really no way to install a continuous gasket, and he doesn't want to leave any gaps. So what should he do? Just install them without any gasket, or is there an alternative that would work in his case? I mean, I would just do it without the gasket. I mean, or putty caulk.
Yes. Yeah,
You know?
or a little bead of clear silicone would be my suggestion. I'd do a little bead of clear silicone, and that is going to form a gasket. A completely pliable gasket. That would be my suggestion. I'd do a little bead of clear silicone. It will mean pulling the driver out of that cabinet.
Back out again. That's right.
It's pretty much glued in there, but
it's now as one.
It really is. You're going to have to come in through the back of the cabinet.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be my solution. Or I am pretty fine just putting it in there without a gasket, because that's what you would have done in the in-wall situation anyway, unless you put some silicone around it, or like you say, acoustic caulk would work just fine as well. So maybe acoustic caulk would be better. I mean, it's still going to be a real challenge to pull it back out if you ever need to, but that's slightly less gluey than clear silicone. So maybe acoustic caulk is a good solution.
So he's hanging these DIY on-wall speakers using metal French cleats, which was what I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. Should he put a thin strip of rubber between the cleat on the wall and the cleat on the speaker cabinet to prevent vibrations? It'd have to be super thin, because the whole idea here is that these things fit really tightly together.
Usually so, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would just hang it and then see if you notice any vibrations. And if you do, then that's when you start looking at caulk again, probably, honestly. But
yeah, no, my real concern is that you put a little bit of rubber in there, and then they don't actually lock together as perfectly and tightly as they're meant to. And that, even though it's rubberized, that's when it falls off the wall. And I don't want that happening.
We're back to speakers falling. We're going to have to call your theater the heads up theater, because everybody's got to wear a hard hat.
That's
when
right.
they come in there. I'd actually worry too about the bottom of the speakers. The French cleat generally is on the top. I mean, sometimes he has one. He might have top and bottom.
Sure.
But if you don't have one on the bottom, you're probably going to want to get some museum putty for the corners, the bottom corners there, just to keep it.
Or at the very least, a little rubber pad or something to put on the bottom corners of the speakers.
You might be. That might be all you really need. So you basically you put it in place. You put a little couple dots of museum putty there, and then you kind of push that into the wall, and now it actually holds it into the French cleat pretty well. So that might be the solution.
Yeah, I'd be a big fan of some dollops of museum putty, man, because that's going to be extra security. Yeah, because that stuff's hard to move.
It is. I'm like looking at it right now. I can see it. Like I can never see it in here normally, but I can see it like between my SVS, the Ultra Bookshelf speakers, and the stand. There's like these little. It looks like the cream filling on that Oreo underneath there. And I'm just like, and you pick that speaker up, and the stand's coming with.
It's good stuff.
They are going. John subscribes to several streaming services, always via their annual plans. He cut the cord long ago, but he's been using Hulu Live TV so they can still watch live local broadcast channels. But now he's looking to drop that service because it's expensive. And it honestly just doesn't get used all that much. However, he doesn't want to completely give up the ability to watch and record local broadcasts, so he's been toying with the idea of an over-the-air setup for a while now. Mm-hmm. He's got an NVIDIA Shield, and that would be his primary device for all of this, so he's thinking an HDR home run network tuner makes sense, but then he needs an antenna, and he'd really prefer it to be an indoor model, and he needs a DVR for recording. So, what can we recommend for a network tuner? Now, I will be honest with you. Every time I research this, which occasionally I do, I end up like being disappointed and irritated that everything's so expensive and nothing works as well as I want. Like, the complaints are always like the guide sucks, and it's not accurate, and if it's not accurate, then you can't send your DVR to do things that you normally would do with like your cable. Honestly, this does not solve your problem. Okay, let me just say that right now. This does not solve your problem, because it just transfers the problem from Hulu to something else. YouTube Live, or whatever it's called these days,
YouTube TV
is what I would do, because you can basically
really any
DVR
cheaper.
Everything.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. It doesn't solve the problem. But then again, I don't think this solves the problem either, because it's you look at the expenditure of money for what you're going to end up doing, and you go, I could get this many years of Hulu out of it, or this many months or whatever it is of Hulu out of this, and it'll be better. Because the YouTube TV in particular, I mean, you can just say record the Olympics, and then you get like all of it. You can watch it at your leisure. That's if I had more money, I would consider doing that just so that we could watch network TV every once in a while. But
Sure.
I agree with you 100%. It's just
I don't
not
disagree.
easy.
It's just, it's only shifting. If there's a difference in price, it's not big anymore because all of the streamable live TV services have converged on pretty darn similar price points at this time. So, I mean, to answer the question as wrote, I mean, really, the HD home run from Silicon Dust network tuners are... I mean, they're not the only game in town, but they're getting pretty close to it. So really, there's the Flex models now. That's what they're up to now. The HD Home Run Flex models, you can either have the one that is ATSC 1.0, 2 tuners for $110, or the one that is ATSC 3.0 and 1.0, if you want to get into the whole next-gen TV thing with potential 4K broadcasts and all of that. So that one is $200. That is 4 tuners total, 2 of them ATSC 3.0, 2 of them ATSC 1.0. So for $90, you've added on 2 ATSC 3.0 tuners. That's of no use to you if you're not in an area that's broadcasting in next-gen TV. So you might just be going for the HD Home Run Flex 2-tuner, $110 network tuner. The antenna, again, we're almost down to it being only game in town. I always used to recommend Mohu. They're gone now. They got bought up by Antennas Direct. That's who owns what used to be Mohu now. So Antennas Direct is where you're going to go, and here you're just going to go for one of their Clearstream. The Clearstream Flex seems to get for indoor antennas the highest ratings. So one of the Clearstream Flex goes for $60. It's not crazy to get a good indoor antenna. And I mean, it is one of the old Mohu Leafs.
I have
That's what
the Mohu, one of the Mohu ones that was the newer. It looks like this. It's similar to this one here, and it's okay. Like, it would be better if it were not indoor, honestly.
Sure.
It just doesn't quite.
But I mean, if all you want to get is your local broadcasts, does a pretty good job of that. So then we're really just down to the DVR side of things. That's a software choice at this point. It's great that you have an NVIDIA Shield that gives you lots of options. Any of these is going to work on there. Silicon Dust themselves, of course, has their own that they do for $35 a year. Pretty good. That's really not crazy expensive. Definitely less expensive than any of the streaming live TV services when that's the only cost that you're doing. Most people don't like their guide. If you're okay with their guide, great, but most people just don't seem to like it. It's not a regular grid guide like we're all used to with any other live TV service. It's this weird, slices thing, and I don't know if that was there's charges for guides because TiVo still owns the patent on them and things like that, so there's weirdness. So they had to do something different to get the price that low, most people just don't like the guide. People have there's reports where they're sometimes the DVR recording stuff can be a little bit finicky. A lot of that is because you're setting it up through your NAS as the place where it's all being actually stored, or you could just plug an external hard drive into your NVIDIA Shield, but then the NVIDIA Shield doesn't always work flawlessly with external hard drives that are plugged into it. There's been plenty of issues there. So whether we can really blame the Silicon Dust DVR software for recording issues, I don't always buy that it's their software that was the problem. I think a lot of times it was something went wrong in someone's NAS, or something went wrong with the external hard drive that was plugged into an NVIDIA Shield or something like that. So all of these things are headaches that might have to be dealt with. The DVR software that seems to get the most customer satisfaction across the board, because it basically works the way you expect and want a live TV service with recording capabilities to work, is the Channels DVR service. It's the most expensive of this group. It's $80 a year. Now, that's still way less expensive than your month-to-month, Hulu Live subscription or YouTube TV subscription. Still way less than that, $80 a year. But this one critically lets you pause and rewind live TV without actually having set a recording. And it's good Lord, of course that's what we want when we're watching live TV, is to be able to pause and rewind without having to actually have preset a recording, and Channels DVR lets you do that. Their guide looks like a regular guide, and it works the way you expect it to. They also actually integrate a bunch of other just regular streaming services, so you could do that all from one interface. So I kind of lean towards, go with the channels DVR if you're going to do this. But, if you're just not happy with the price at $80 a year, it is the top. You're going to have to give up some of the niceties that they provide for that extra money. Plex's DVR is $40 a year, or you can pay $120 for a lifetime and never pay ever again. But it doesn't let you pause and rewind live TV as it's going on. So to me, that's I just wouldn't do that. It would annoy me way too much. But it is only $40 a year. If you already have a Plex Pass, you've already got it. Like if back in the day you already paid for a lifetime Plex Pass, you don't have to pay again. You could just use the Plex DVR on your NVIDIA Shield, but you won't be able to pause live TV. So I think that's it. I'd pay a little bit extra, right? I'd pay $80 a year and get the channels DVR. It's going to be the best experience.
Yeah, I never can justify it every time I try to do it. I can never
just for live TV.
Dan, first of all, he has an HDMI Rant. Let's say you have a relatively straightforward setup, a 4K TV that can do HDR, an AV receiver, or maybe just a soundbar, and one main source that can do 4K and HDR. Why is that not dead simple to connect and set up?
I mean, I'm with you, Dan.
HDMI
I laugh because I'm with
the reason. Again, nobody talks
to
each
HDMI
other.
Rant.
Nobody talks to each other. They can't all decide to just work together and name everything the same. And
right.
So physically plug them in. Maybe that's not so bad with HDMI, but then you get to the settings. Your TV has these crazy enhanced versus standard or ultra HD deep color settings, not to mention anything to do with VRR or 120 hertz. And they aren't even in the picture settings. They're in the input settings, or sometimes buried even deeper. Dog, sit down. Deeper in some other menu, and then your AV receiver also has enhanced or standard HDMI connection settings, or you might need some particular setting to make sure Dolby Vision or HDR10 gets through, or 10 plus gets through. And even the source device itself might have to be adjusted just to get it to output the best signal is capable of sending. Dan knows enough to look for all this stuff, but how on earth is your average non-techie, non-home theater enthusiast person supposed to know all of this? Wasn't HDMI CEC and all of the HDMI handshaking supposed to automate all of this? Why is it still so complicated? He's got to believe there are lots of people out there who are not seeing or hearing what their equipment is actually capable of delivering. Most people have no idea what a TV is supposed to look like. They get it home, they plug it in, they turn it on, they're like, well, that's what TV looks like.
There are still people with stretched images still to this day.
How many times have I complained about my friend's house where they still, in fact, I went back to their house recently. They still have they turned it back on because I turned it off. The automatic dimming thing. The room ambient light setting thing, so that if you walk in front of the TV and you cast
to be fair, that's not HDMI's fault.
I know, but I mean, they don't even know to turn that off. Yeah. The smoothing that my wife noticed that one time at when we were at Airbnb, which I hate saying my wife noticed something, but it was it's not like people can't notice it or can't know that something's wrong. But they're just going to go, that's just the way it is.
It does make me wonder, all these people who talk about you can't use OLEDs in a lit room, you have to get an LCD. I'm like, if they never took it out of that power-saving picture mode that it comes in default, OLED looks way too dim. So maybe that's where it's all coming from.
There's a lot of stuff
kind of see that. I could understand it.
So, and everybody I have to say, everybody that listens to this podcast, I think that's a fairly safe assumption. Everybody that listens to this podcast is enough into home theater that they are going to recognize that there are, settings that they have to go into. They're going to feel comfortable doing that. But, my other hobby is cycling, right? And I cannot tell you how many times in my own family that things have happened. I've been like, why is your bicycle like this? Like, why have you not mentioned to me that your bicycle is like this? Oh, that's just the way it is. Like, it's not supposed to be. Oh, well, it's fine. It still works. It's not supposed to be this way. Your brake. Like, what is that noise? Oh, no, it just makes that noise. That's your brake rubbing. Oh, is it? Yeah. That it just makes that noise. I'm like, is it hard to pedal? Oh, sometimes. It's because you're braking. Like, give me 2 seconds. I can fix this in 2 seconds. I just need a screwdriver or an Allen wrench, and it'll be better. Oh no, that's just the way bikes are. That's how people address things that they don't know. They're just like, this is how it's supposed to be. This is it.
Sure. in a way, that is how we ended up where we are in terms of, HDMI handshake. Like Dan's like, weren't they all supposed to have data that they transferred among each other? Like, here's what I can do. All right, here's what I'm capable of accepting. All right, let's partner up and give each other the best that we're able. Right? Like, you're thinking again, 1,000-foot view. Like that's what HDMI was supposed to do. But instead, what we got was, what's the lowest common denominator that we know you're going to get picture and sound? Is it going to be the best picture and sound that all of these devices are capable of? Nope, but you're going to get picture and sound. So we end up with stereo audio and SDR television, right? Like that's where it ended up, because they were much more worried in the end about, you're just not going to have the scenario where you connected your devices and you don't get a picture or you don't get sound.
Right.
People will complain a lot about that.
Yes.
What they won't complain about is what they don't even know they're missing.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with you, Dan. We're all on the same page here and listening to this podcast. But I do believe that's where a lot of how we ended up where we are. Like, why is the default the standard HDMI bandwidth and not the enhanced? And sometimes the TVs are good at auto-detecting that and switching themselves and putting up a scary techie-sounding warning that makes people go, what the hell are they talking about? What's HDMI deep color? Is that supposed to be on? I don't know what's going on. But, in terms of your AV receiver being in standard mode out of the box, it's like, well, it's gonna function. You're not gonna plug in your 3D Blu-ray player and get a black screen. It's gonna work. Yeah. So that's where we ended up.
Well, and even with HDMI, CC and ARC and eARC and all that crap, you can see that things have gotten better from when they were first implemented. Yep. And these new 4K, 120 hertz processing, VRR, all that stuff. Yeah. That's really new. That's really, really new. And even HDR.
I mean, not for anybody who's been using a computer. They're like, what are you talking about? But,
I know.
Yes.
But it is for home theater. And the same with like HDR. HDR has not nearly been around long enough for everybody to kind of know how to do it right. Yeah. So they are going to default to something that's a little safer. And, I can't, like Rob said, it's way better to have a bad image than to have no image. It's way better to have not great sound than to have no sound. So they will definitely, like, I don't care what happens, as long as when they plug stuff into the TV, it gives them a picture and some sound.
That's right.
That's all I care about. And then if it could be the right picture and right sound, great. But it better never be no picture or no sound.
Exactly, because then that product's getting returned.
That's right.
There's no question about it.
So next he says, here on the podcast, we talk about HDMI CC. He'd get that most of our audience is at least aware of what we're talking about, but we all know that every different brand has come up with their own marketing name for CC. Not to mention other features that are enabled by HDMI's multitude of different specification numbers, often getting marketing names as well. So why is that a thing? Wasn't it supposed to be that HDMI created industry-wide standards and the consumers would be able to feel confident plugging one HDMI device into another and they would handshake and it would just work? Honestly, how are people supposed to know what actually works with what? And how are they supposed to know the correct settings? Well, you're talking about two different things. Two different groups of people. One is engineers who are like, we're going to create a standard and then it'll work and it'll be fine. And the marketing people go, and we're going to call it Internet Plus.
Because we want you to buy only our brand.
That's right. We're going to call it Bravia Sync. Or we're going to call it, you know what I mean? And everybody's going to be like, well, does your... And I have had this experience before with people who are like going to different retailers and saying, does this TV have any Net Plus? Yeah. Does it have Internet Plus? It doesn't? Okay. Well, I can't buy this one because Internet Plus is the one that works with my DVD player. And they're like, no matter how just like the guy that we were just talking about, right? The SVS Emotiva guy.
Right.
That guy was already sure that he knew the answer to the question of should you power an Emotiva SVS speaker with the Emotiva amp. These people are already convinced by the marketing that if it doesn't have the exact same brand name, then it can't possibly work together. And in all honesty, sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're not wrong.
Although sometimes you do get the same brand and it still doesn't work smoothly. So that is still not a guarantee.
So, Yes, it
That's
is all
all it
about
is.
marketing and product placement.
Yeah. Yep. No, I don't have any more of that. They just want you to buy all the same brand. That's where
right.
all that came from. And I mean, when you talk about an industry standard, who do you think the industry is?
Yes.
The industry is a bunch of these different brands, all of whom want proprietary, only works with our brand stuff. They're still stuck in that mindset. So, why has ATSC 3.0 taken forever and still really hasn't rolled out en masse? You just can't get all of these brands with their different patent portfolios to agree on a single standard. The fact that DVD ever came out and didn't have a truly viable competitor was like a miracle, and it was like down to one guy at Warner Brothers who yelled at everybody until they agreed.
That is true. Like that was one of the few formats that came out, and it was like no format war.
And
right?
which ones have been the most successful and stuck around forever and ever? Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd think they'd learn, but they never do.
Next, he says, don't get him started on a long HDMI cable run. Seems to him this has been a flaw with HDMI from day one. You mean the overly complex cable that didn't need to be this overly complex that we've been complaining about since we looked at it and went, wait a second, we can get all this through component video. It's not even that much bigger if you if you get one good cable, but it just has 3 connectors. Why are we doing this? He says it feels more like luck if a long HDMI connection actually works. Did they never envision people connecting projectors or having gear closets? Yeah. So the initial, first of all, it's all about bandwidth, number one, and they tried to make a single cable solution that carried everything, but also had all this HDCP, the copy protection built in. And when they did all that, the complexity of the cable, there are 19 wires inside of an HDMI.
Pairs of wires.
19 pairs of wires inside an HDMI cable.
Unless it's fiber optic. And that's where we've ended up for long. Because if you want, ultra high speed and long, it's fiber optic. There's no other choice.
Which is insane, because if you do that, if you like, I'm going to, instead of using HDMI for my audio, I'll just use HDMI for my video and send the audio via optical back down to my receiver or whatever. You're like, okay, that only does lossy 5.1. Well, why? It's fiber optic. Shouldn't it be? You're right. It should be able to. In fact, it can. It could. But they just don't let it. They just don't let it do that.
It's the transmitters and receivers on the either end of the cable. The cable isn't the issue.
The cable is not the issue. Yeah. So yes, it is frustrating. It's been frustrating. We have said it from day one. The idea of a single cable solution, I think, is good. Like I do like it. That is not the problem. The implementation has been horrendous, and it continues to be because of the decisions that they've made to in how the cable was constructed, in the connector itself. Like, why isn't it locking? Why is this cable not locking? Why is it friction fit? Who decided that was a good idea? I mean, that's a ludicrous solution. When you can think about
again, we had those SPDIF cables. Like those aren't like screw it in type of locking, but there's like a little click. There's a little click.
Well, the BNC ones too, right? Which have an actual locking ring on them.
An actual lock, but even if you don't want to twist, just something that's got a little click to it is all we needed.
Yeah, I am. There's lots of things wrong with the HDMI cable. Okay, believe me. Length is the tip of the iceberg for things I have problems with this HDMI cable. He's got a Denon X4700H with a single HDMI 2.1 input. He signed up and got Denon's SPK618 HDMI adapter box thingy for free before the September 2022 deadline. But what he's actually supposed to do with it? It just came with a power plug, a single HDMI cable, and one HDMI input and one HDMI output. How is that useful? Well, I mean, it goes in between. It goes in between your game console or your 4K 120, whatever.
It's the 4K 120. Yeah. It's all about the 4K 120. The chipset that is actually built into your X4700H, it was early on in the HDMI 2.1 times, and they basically screwed it up a little bit. So when you plugged a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X into it and tried to do 4K 120, it didn't work. didn't make it through.
Almost.
So this is like a little translator box. So they do have a 3-in, 1-out switch, but
Yes.
you always had to pay $200 for that. This was a make good because they marketed the X4700H as being able to accept 4K 120 and 8K signals, and it couldn't. So this was their make good to say, well, we're still only giving you one HDMI input that can handle 4K 120, but you need this external box to do the one. So that's what it's useful for. If you want to plug an Xbox Series X or a PlayStation 5 or a computer with a higher end GPU and do 4K 120 or 8K, you need this in between that source device and your HDMI AV receiver, and it has its own little power plug that you need to plug in to make all of that happen. And that's all it's for.
Yes, it's very exciting. And yeah, you can get when this came out, I was lamenting that they didn't give you more inputs when they could have.
Right.
And then they started selling that box. I was like,
yes,
that makes sense. I guess.
That's why.
Yeah.
Charge a little more.
Bertrand in Quebec. He says, is there a way to display how many megabits per second his Apple TV 4K is receiving while streaming, say Netflix or Apple TV Plus? He's got a MacBook Pro that he sometimes uses to stream video, and two Apple TV 4Ks in his house. I don't know. I don't know how to do that. It's
very handy that you have those devices because you need them both for this to, work in the sort of semi-official way. So I'm going to have a link over to How To Geek because they're the ones who have the full write-up on this. But to quickly run it, I'm borrowing all of this. I don't know this information from me. I'm borrowing all this from How To Geek. So please click on the link and give them some support. But on your Apple TV device, you're going to just go into the settings and go into the remotes and devices and then leave your Apple TV there in the remotes and devices section. Just leave it sitting there idle inside of the settings, remotes, and devices. Once your Apple TV is done, you're going to go over to your MacBook Pro. It's handy that you have that. And you're going to need to, if you don't already have it, download and install directly from the Mac store. This isn't like third-party software or something you have to sideload. It's available in the Mac store. Xcode. Xcode is the program that you need to have. So you open that up, go to the Windows tab, and go to the Devices and Simulators section of that. Click in there, and you'll be able to now pair your Apple TV with your MacBook Pro through the Xcode program, as long as they're both on the same network, of course. Over on your TV, your Apple TV will now pop up a code on your TV screen that you have to enter in your MacBook to get these things all talking to each other. And when you do, now you'll be able to open up the developer options on the Apple TV. So now you've unlocked the developer options of the Apple TV. Inside of there, you have the playback HUD in the developer part of the settings. And once you activate the playback HUD, you'll be able to see a whole bunch of information, including the bit rate of whatever you're watching when you stream something on your Apple TV. So that's how To Geek said to do it. I didn't know a different or better way, and that all sounds like something you'll be able to do thanks to already having an Apple TV and a MacBook. It's handy that you had those things because I don't know if there's a way to do it with a Windows computer.
Well, I should have seen what time it was before I started this question, but I guess we'll power through. The reason he wants to see his streaming bit rates is because he's noticed that lately Netflix seems to be having video quality issues where the video gets all compressed, even blocky at times. He's pretty sure he's got good internet service, and these drops in video quality from Netflix are happening even when nothing else is streaming anywhere else in the house. And it happens on all of his devices. That said, he is using Wi-Fi, so would plugging in Ethernet cables fix it? Now, I had issues like this when I was streaming everything via Wi-Fi rather than plugging in directly via Ethernet. So I ran an Ethernet cable from my router all the way like forever around the outside of my house and into my home theater and then plugged it into a switch and then a gigabit switch and then plugged everything into that. That reduced the number of problems I had significantly, or the occurrence, the number of occurrences of problems significantly, but did not delete them completely because not all these issues are coming from inside the house. Many times, like there's certain times a day when like right around 5:30 or so when people get home from work. and suddenly, like, I lose internet or the internet slows to a crawl. And it's not because of my house or how many people are in my house are streaming. It's because of how many people are hitting the nodes or whatever, you know, and all trying to do
And I mean, like, he was
time.
like, you know, when he watches Apple TV Plus, this doesn't happen. So it makes me think it's probably not your own Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
You know, probably not. It's probably not even your internet service. Like Netflix, they spent piles and piles of money to physically put Netflix servers in locations in many, many neighborhoods all over North America and the entire world. You know, maybe yours just isn't as close as it needs to be to deliver completely smooth streaming to your neighborhood. Or maybe there was one in your neighborhood that isn't online anymore. And now, like, it's amazing. You're thinking, you know, this is all electronic signals going across the internet. How can it actually make a difference where it's physically located? But when we're talking about these, you know, picoseconds of difference, it does make a difference. So given that it was really just Netflix that this is happening with, I suspect it's more just down to wherever your Netflix servers are that you're pulling the information from. But you can do the test that you already asked about. That's a great thing to do. And now you'll be able to view on all your various streaming services what's going on. And if it's like same time of day, Netflix is starting to get choppy, but none of your other streaming services are, then you know that it's not really your Wi-Fi that's to blame.
Well, I mean, you can take that out of the equation by running Ethernet anyways, but certainly it doesn't sound to me like it's.
I mean, I know there's gonna be a physical hassle running Ethernet depending on where it is, so I can understand wanting to do that first. Yeah.
So there's still much concern about how to aim overhead Atmos speakers. We've always said just point them straight down in his very small 11 by 13 foot room with his Martin Logan Motion 2i on-wall speakers, that's been totally fine. But in a bigger room, when the Atmos speakers need to be aimed just like any other speakers, no, stop it.
Well, I mean, I've always said the same thing. You want to be within the dispersion cone of your speaker, right? Yeah. Now, Atmos speakers, according to Dolby, if they're in-ceiling Atmos speakers, they want you to have in-ceiling speakers with very wide dispersion. Plus and minus 45-degree angle dispersion is what they want. Now, if you get most standard in-ceiling speakers that almost all of them use a coaxial design, right? That's your standard. The tweeter's in the middle of the woofer. And if you're getting the Sonance Mag 6s that I recommend all the time, Kef in-ceiling speakers that I recommend all the time, RBH in-ceiling speakers that I recommend, like any of the ones that I've ever recommended, they all have that. They all have that very wide, even dispersion, which means as long as your Atmos speakers are positioned more or less where they should be, according to the angles that Dolby gives you, you're going to be within the 45 plus or minus 45 degree dispersion window of any of those speakers. I've always said, if you get directional overhead speakers, Golden Ear comes up all the time because their in-ceiling speakers are quite directional. You're going to, if you're worried about it, end up aiming those so that you're within the cone of dispersion of those speakers. That hasn't really changed. So I don't know why it continues to be such a worry, because honestly, if you put on some Atmos content and just disconnect all of your floor level speakers so that you're only hearing what's coming out of those Atmos speakers, my goodness, is it not very much? And if there is anything there, it's not very important. So I don't worry about it at all.
Cue all the people who watch The Quiet Place to do this.
Sure. But I mean, I much more hate the idea of any kind of hassle of trying to angle an in-ceiling speaker that isn't already angled. I will also say, all of these in-ceiling speakers that come with the built-in 25 or 30 degree angle or whatever, have you actually listened to what happens when you build a speaker that way? Because it sounds like crap. And then just as bad or worse than that is pivoting only the tweeter.
Only the tweeter.
Because a lot of them do that. A lot of them let you do that. They let you pivot the tweeter, but not any other part of the driver. So you only pivot the tweeter and end up with these horrible intermodulation things going on if you actually play a sweep and listen to what's really going on. So all these solutions that people are worried about, I'm like, I think you're arguing for the sake of arguing, because you can't get it out of your head that you want to point all your speakers directly at your face. But like,
please, for the love of God, stop.
The actual answer I've given has never changed.
I know. We're legitimately we're very consistent, and the thing is it's some things Some things are we are consistent about, but it doesn't. It's predicated on our recommendations. So we're like, you don't need aimable speakers for that Atmos. You just have them go straight down because that's how they're meant to be. But then that's predicated on the fact that we only recommend in-ceiling speakers that have the right dispersion to begin with. Therefore, we would never have you put in like, speakers with really directional tweeters in your ceiling, because that's just not what we would ever recommend. Same thing with all these Dolby diagrams that they've changed them slightly, but that were that had every speaker pointing at your head or right in the middle of the couch, and now you see all these pictures of people's systems, and like there's a million speakers in a 10 by 9 foot room. They have a 7.4.6 configuration with speakers that are 2 physical feet from each other, all pointed directly at their face. And I'm like, no, stop it.
And guess what? If I have 6 overhead speakers and they're prime elevations or one of those other wedge-shaped speakers or whatever, and it means they are angled a bit at me, I'm fine with that too. I'm not like, well, because they're not pointed straight down, I'm never going to use them. Like, no, that's fine. Like, be within the cone of dispersion.
Yeah.
That's all. That's it. Yeah. Not terrible.
So he's been very happy with his new MacBook Pro. One thing that pleasantly surprised him was the sound quality from its built-in speakers. Honest to goodness, they create a pretty convincing surround type effect. Even though they're just tiny speakers built in a laptop. Can we explain how they've managed to do this? It's called phase. But
there's a little bit more than just phase going on these days. This is a great example. Apple's a very good example of one of the benefits of having fully active speakers, meaning that the crossover, if there is one, very often there isn't because it's just one tiny little driver, but if there is a crossover and then the amplifier that's attached to any of those speakers, that's all controlled digitally. Before the speaker ever starts making any sound, there's all this digital control before it. And they're a great example of what can be achieved with that. You've got these speaker drivers that if you just fed them a normally amplified signal, they would sound like crap because just physically they don't have the surface area, the excursion, any of these things, and certainly not the linear response to just a linear signal. They don't have any of those things to sound good. But once you initiate all this digital control that they're able to do, and I mean, this counts for their iPhones as well. iPhone speakers sound way better than that speaker ever should. Like, certainly if you just sent it a linear amplified signal, they wouldn't sound anything like that. So there's a ton of digital control that's going on, and then they further are now using that digital control to apply head-related transfer functions. And you must be someone who falls more closely within the average head-related transfer function, because of course that's all they can apply, right? If they measure a whole bunch of different people's head-related transfer functions and you plot those all out, you'll get this nice cluster in the middle where most people fall, and then there'll be some people towards the edges of that cluster and some people who are outliers of, where most people's head-related transfer functions end up getting plotted. If you're nicely within that cluster, and let's face it, most people are, that's how you end up with that cluster, then applying that digital head-related transfer function can result in some really quite convincing surround effects, played out of not inherently very good speakers, in fact, inherently quite bad speaker drivers, but with all of this wonderful control applied to them. They are capable of this type of thing. I know for me, I must be closer to the edges of that cluster or maybe a little bit of an outlier because like binaural recordings don't work for me. They just don't work for me. And most of these surround effects coming out of 2 speakers, even if they're really good speakers, the surround effects coming out of soundbars and stuff, it doesn't work for me. I've got too fat a head or something. Like it's just, it doesn't work very well for me. And I know that other people are having a better experience. So something about my individual head-related transfer function must not fit very nicely into the cluster of most average head-related transfer functions. But I think yours probably does if you're saying that you're getting this really quite convincing surround effect. And that's the idea. It's supposed to. And there is a reason for that cluster. So yeah, that's what's going on.
All right, who do we have left?
We have Kevin and Greg on the list, and I did get an email from Dylan on Monday, so I'll mention I got your email, Dylan, so you're not wondering about that, and they'll be up next week.
All right. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Aras and Eric for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and leaving us a PayPal donation, as well as our 137 patrons over at patreon.com, including Bertrand. Thank you very much.
That is right. Aras and Eric, thank you for the PayPal donations, and patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go if you want to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation, not just a one-time one. So we got 137 patrons over there. Thank you all so much. Bertrand, thank you for being one of them.
And we've got some people who sent some notes of gratitude from Dazz, Karl, Aras, Gurinder, Infinite Gary, Jay, Mark, Dan, Bertrand, and Greg. Thank you for thanking us.
Yes, indeed. Dazz, Karl, Aras, Gurinder, Infinite Gary, Jay, Mark, Dan, Bertrand, and Greg, thank you for sending us those notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. We are heading into 2023. This is the final podcast of 2022. So Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you all for continuing to listen and send in your questions. We're going to be here for another year.
All right. If you want to get your question answered on this podcast, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.